The emergency room was full that night. Flu season, accidents, cries of pain. But amidst all that chaos, one frail voice kept calling out unheard. "Please, someone help me," whispered an old lady clutching her chest, her silver hair matted with rain. The nurses glanced at her and turned away. "She's probably just seeking attention again," one muttered under her breath. Minutes passed. Then her bracelet, a worn gold one with strange initials, slipped from her wrist and rolled under a nurse's shoe. When the nurse picked it up and read the engraving, her face went pale. The old lady wasn't just anyone, and what happened next would make national news. Take a moment right now to like this video, comment, share it with others, and subscribe to Moral Avenue. Together, we can remind the world that compassion isn't optional. It's what makes us human. It started earlier that rainy evening. Margaret Ellis, 78 years old, had lived alone for nearly a decade. Her husband had passed away quietly in his sleep, and her only daughter had moved across the country. Neighbors knew her as Miss Maggie, the lady who still fed stray cats and baked cookies for the mailman every Christmas. But lately, she'd been feeling weak, dizzy, off. When she woke up that night gasping for air, clutching her chest, she didn't call 911 immediately. She didn't want to be a bother. But when the pain grew unbearable, she grabbed her purse, threw on a coat, and drove herself trembling to the nearest hospital. She didn't know it yet, but that decision would expose something rotten behind the hospital's polished glass doors. The receptionist barely looked up when Margaret entered, soaked and shaking. "Name: Margaret Ellis. I can't breathe properly." The woman at the desk sighed. "Take a seat. We'll call you." There were at least 10 people ahead of her. Most were scrolling their phones. No one noticed the old woman struggling to stay conscious in the plastic chair. Behind the glass window, nurses chatted about their upcoming weekend trip. Laughter echoed while the smell of disinfectant hung thick in the air. Margaret tried again. "Please, I think it's my heart." A young nurse frowned. "Ma'am, please sit down. You'll be seen in order." In the surveillance footage later released, you can see her slowly slide down the chair unnoticed as the monitor behind the counter blinked with the words, "Critical triage incoming." But no one moved. By the time they realized she had collapsed, nearly 20 minutes had passed. 2 orderlies rushed her into a room, muttering complaints about these walk-ins who think everything's an emergency. Nurse Karen, tall, composed, and always in control, rolled her eyes. "She's probably another lonely senior looking for attention. Happens every week." They checked her vitals. Weak pulse. Low oxygen. Yet even then, Karen dismissed it. "She's stable. Let's move her to the waiting bay. We've got a real trauma case coming." The intern hesitated. "But her EKG looks..." "Do what I said," Karen snapped. Margaret drifted in and out of consciousness. Through the haze, she heard voices, cold, efficient, detached. She wanted to scream, "I matter too," but the oxygen mask muffled her voice. In another room, a nurse complained about overtime pay. Someone else joked about a viral TikTok challenge. And in that sterile world of flashing monitors and forgotten patients, one woman's life quietly slipped away. But fate wasn't finished with them. Because as Margaret's trembling hand fell limp, that golden bracelet, the one she'd worn for decades, unclasped and rolled across the floor, landing at the feet of Nurse Karen. Karen sighed, stooped to pick it up, and froze. On the inside was engraved, "ME Founder, St. Grace Memorial Fund." Her mind raced. St. Grace Memorial, the hospital's original sponsor foundation. The woman lying on that gurney wasn't some random patient. She was the widow of the man who had built this hospital. Karen's throat tightened. "Get Dr. Parker." Now, chaos erupted. The ER director himself ran in. "Is that... Are you sure it's her?" "Yes," Karen stammered. "Margaret Ellis. She's the founder's wife." Suddenly, every nurse and doctor who had ignored her was scrambling. Machines beeped, commands shouted, defibrillators charged. But karma doesn't wait for convenience. Margaret's heart flatlined once, then again. The doctors worked furiously, sweat dripping, regret hanging heavy in the air. And as they fought to bring her back, something deeper began to unravel. One of the interns, shaken by guilt, went to the hospital security office. He pulled up the footage of the waiting room where you could see the exact moment she begged for help and was ignored. The next morning, that clip leaked online. By noon, #JusticeForMargaret was trending nationwide. News anchors replayed the footage with disbelief. How could a hospital neglect a patient like this? One reporter said. Especially when that hospital was built in her family's name? The public outrage was instant. Investigations launched. Lawsuits filed. Careers destroyed. But in a quiet ICU room, Margaret Ellis, barely alive, eyes fluttering, opened her mouth to whisper something. A nurse leaned closer. "I warned them," she rasped. "I told them years ago. Kindness saves more lives than medicine ever will." Her heart monitor beeped steadily and she was alive, but weak. Outside her room, Nurse Karen broke down. She hadn't slept. Couldn't. The guilt was suffocating. When Margaret's daughter, Emily Ellis, arrived from New York, the staff fell silent. Emily was a successful investigative journalist, the kind who exposed corporate corruption for breakfast. Her eyes were cold as she walked through the ER, camera in hand. "Don't worry," she told her mother softly. "They'll learn what it means to ignore the wrong person." That night, she began making phone calls to lawyers, networks, even a senator. By dawn, Moral Justice Weekly broke the story. Hospital that ignored elderly woman turns out to be her own foundation. The entire country watched in outrage. But beneath that storm, something else was brewing. Because what no one knew yet, not even Margaret's daughter, was that the hospital board had been hiding much darker secrets tied to her husband's death. And Margaret might have known all along. Weeks passed. The hospital faced national scrutiny. The ER director resigned. Nurse Karen was suspended pending investigation. Posters and news headlines covered every screen, neglect or intent. Margaret recovered slowly, her heart weak but her spirit unbroken. One evening, she asked for her bracelet. When they returned it, she smiled faintly. "You see this," she said to her daughter. "Your father gave it to me the day we opened this hospital. He said, 'Let this remind you we built this place for people, not for profit.'" Emily nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Then we'll make it that again, Mom. I promise." But as Margaret drifted to sleep, the monitor flickered oddly. A faint beeping sound steady, then distorted. The night nurse frowned, checking the system. "That's strange. The file says Margaret Ellis was already marked deceased 2 years ago." The nurse blinked, confused. "What?" The screen glitched. Then a hidden file popped up on the monitor. "Project Grace Confidential, Ellis Foundation Fraud Report." The nurse gasped. "What is this?" Margaret's bracelet gleamed faintly under the light, and somewhere deep in the hospital archives, a locked drawer clicked open. To be continued in Part 2. The truth behind the Ellis Foundation and what the hospital tried to hide will shock the world. Moral: kindness can save a life. Neglect can destroy many. If this story shook you, make sure to subscribe to Moral Avenue, where we uncover the truth behind the choices that define us. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with friends, and leave a comment below. Your support helps us continue spreading stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of what truly matters. Before we end, I have one special request. Comment below, what would you have done if you saw that old woman waiting alone in that ER? Thank you for watching Moral Avenue, because sometimes the smallest act of compassion can change everything.